Naomi Carter had dealt with every type of man who walked into the urology department of New York. General shy husbands terrified of diagnosis, playboys pretending to be brave elderly men, cracking inappropriate jokes to mask their discomfort. She had learned long ago that maintaining distance and absolute professionalism was the only way to survive in a field where most people underestimated her simply because she was young, female, and black. But she also knew no one in this building was better at her job than she was. At 27, she'd already earned the reputation of being sharp, unflinching, and brutally honest when needed. She wasn't afraid to stare a problem in the face, no matter where that problem happened to be located anatomically. It was precisely this reputation that brought the elegant old woman to her door one Wednesday afternoon. Naomi was finishing up chart notes from a difficult morning when a soft knock sounded. Without looking up, she said, "Come in." Her pen stilled only when the scent of expensive lavender drifted in a kind she'd only smelled in upscale Manhattan stores. Naomi lifted her eyes and found a woman who looked as though she stepped out of a royal portrait. Silver hair swept into a chignon pearl earrings that had probably seen more history than the hospital itself, and a walking cane with a carved lion's head. British, upper class, old money, Dr. Carter. The woman asked, her voice warm but threaded with urgency. "I'm Eleanor Sterling. I'm terribly sorry to come without an appointment, but I need your help." Naomi straightened. Sterling. That name rang loudly in the world of business, philanthropy, politics. Eleanor Sterling was practically royalty in New York. "Of course," Naomi replied, gesturing toward the chair opposite her desk. "How can I help you today?" Eleanor sat delicately, but her eyes were fierce and anxious. "It's about my grandson." She began, lowering her voice as though the walls themselves had ears. "He's experiencing a troubling condition, something of a very private nature. He's far too embarrassed to ask for help, but he needs a doctor, a discreet one. And I heard you're the best." Naomi felt a familiar pinch in her chest, a mix of pride and the weariness that came from constantly having to prove she earned that title. "What kind of condition?" she asked. Eleanor hesitated, cheeks flushing. "His physiological functioning as a man." "Ah, of course." Naomi kept her expression neutral, though internally she was already preparing herself for yet another uncomfortable conversation. "I can take a look," she said carefully. "But he needs to come in personally. I can't treat someone I haven't examined." Eleanor's relief was palpable. "Thank you, my dear. He's waiting right outside." Naomi blinked. Outside. Now. She wasn't prepared for a last-minute slot, but refusing Eleanor Sterling was like refusing the mayor. With a resigned sigh, she nodded. "All right, send him in." She expected a nervous young man, maybe a shy corporate heir or a stressed businessman. She absolutely did not expect the door to open and reveal him. Alexander Sterling. The Alexander Sterling. The 33-year-old billionaire founder of Sterling Tech, a man who controlled half the digital infrastructure of New York. A man whose face appeared in Forbes' Fortune and every financial headline at least twice a month. A man known for his razor-sharp mind, colder-than-winter demeanor, and an aura of authority so suffocating it was rumored board members avoided making eye contact with him. And he was here, in her office, closing the door behind him as if he owned the place. For one long heartbeat, Naomi could only stare. It wasn't just that he was absurdly handsome, though he was, with sharp cheekbones, storm-gray eyes, and a presence that filled every corner of the room. It was the fact that he looked like the last person on earth who would ever suffer any kind of physiological problem. A man like him didn't look vulnerable. He looked invincible. And yet here he was, coming to her for help. Except something was off. The way he walked, shoulders straight, chin-high gaze, coolly assessing her from head to toe. It didn't match the description of a man embarrassed about his condition. He didn't appear worried or self-conscious. If anything, he looked curious, intrigued, suspicious. Naomi pushed aside the unsettling thought and cleared her throat. "Mr. Sterling," she said professionally, gesturing toward the examination area. "I understand you're experiencing some physiological issues." His gray eyes gleamed with amusement. "That's what my grandmother told you, isn't it?" Naomi frowned slightly. "Isn't it true?" He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer, examining her, as though she were an equation he intended to solve. "Dr. Carter, you're much younger than I expected, and you're much healthier looking than I expected for someone with a supposed dysfunction." She shot back before she could stop herself. His lips curved just barely, a ghost of a smirk. "Touché." They moved to the examination area. Naomi put on gloves, keeping her movements efficient and devoid of emotion. She'd done this 1,000 times. She knew how to detach, how to turn clinical instinct on, and personal discomfort off. But something about him made the air feel heavier, charged. She could feel his eyes on her even when she wasn't looking at him. When she instructed him to lie down and relax, he cocked an eyebrow. "Relax isn't exactly my specialty. It is today," she said tightly. The examination began, and Naomi focused entirely on her task. She was thorough, professional, calm. But halfway through, she felt Alexander watching her, not with embarrassment, but with unsettling fascination. Then he spoke, his voice low, smooth, and infuriatingly amused. "You're very skilled, Dr. Carter. Do you perform these particular maneuvers every day?" Naomi's head snapped up. "I'm a doctor. You're a patient. Don't confuse the two." His smirk deepened. "So you don't flirt with patients then?" "Not even with billionaires," she said flatly. He let out a soft breath that might have been a laugh. Pity. She ignored him and focused on the results. And when she finished, she stepped back, pulling off her gloves with a decisive snap. "There is nothing physically wrong with you, Mr. Sterling. Your results are perfect," she admitted reluctantly. "In fact, I'd say you're in excellent health for someone with your workload." Alexander sat up, buttoning his shirt, with unhurried confidence. "So, no problem at all?" "None," she said, feeling both relieved and annoyed. Eleanor Sterling had dragged her into this for no reason, but Alexander didn't look surprised. He didn't even look relieved. He looked satisfied, as though the entire appointment had gone exactly the way he intended. "Good," he murmured, adjusting his cuffs. "Very good." Suspicion prickled along Naomi's spine. Something wasn't right. People didn't fake this kind of problem. Billionaires definitely didn't. But before she could question him further, he rose, towering over her with effortless dominance. "Thank you, Dr. Carter," he said in a voice that sent an inexplicable shiver down her back. "You've been enlightening." And then he left. The door hadn't even fully clicked shut before Naomi exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. What the hell had just happened? Why had he come? Why had he lied? And why did she feel annoyingly like he'd learned far more about her than she had about him? That night, somewhere high above Manhattan, in a penthouse that overlooked half the city, Alexander Sterling stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in hand. His assistant Daniel approached cautiously. "Sir, you asked me to come." Alexander didn't turn. "Look into Dr. Naomi Carter," he said quietly, swirling the amber liquid. "I want every detail. Background, family, education, everything." Daniel blinked, startled. "The doctor from today. Did you like her?" Alexander's gaze remained fixed on the glittering city below. "She didn't flinch," he murmured. "She didn't tremble. She didn't treat me like a god or a monster. She looked at me like a man. A pause. A slow, dangerous smile. I want to know everything about her. And Daniel. Yes, sir. Discreetly. His assistant hesitated. Should I inform Mrs. Sterling? Alexander finally turned eyes cold and certain. No. Not yet. I need to understand her first. He raised the glass to his lips, a decision settling in his gaze like a storm preparing to break. She's going to be important. Naomi had seen strange things in her life. Strange patients, strange excuses, strange medical emergencies that could fill entire books. But nothing prepared her for what she found waiting at her apartment door that evening. The hallway of her old brick building in Harlem smelled faintly of curry and detergent, the familiar scent of home after a long shift at the hospital. But right at her feet, sparkling absurdly beneath the flickering hallway light, lay a velvet black box tied with a silver ribbon. It looked so out of place in this worn-down corridor that her first instinct was to check whether she had stepped into someone else's life by mistake. She knelt slowly, fingertips brushing the ribbon, and sensed instantly that the box cost more than her entire monthly rent. Inside, nestled in satin, was a diamond-crusted envelope, and inside that envelope were three things. 1. A platinum bank card gleaming unnaturally even in dim light. 2. A bound document thick enough to be a contract. 3. A business card engraved with one name in stark, elegant letters: Alexander Sterling. For a moment, Naomi simply stared, unable to process, unable to breathe. Her pulse hammered against her ribs with the dull force of disbelief. When she finally found her voice again, it came out hoarse. No. No way. She yanked the contract open with trembling fingers. Bold letters stared back at her temporary marriage agreement. 12 months. And below that, her name typed precisely as though someone had been preparing this well before she even knew he existed. Her shock collided with a bolt of anger so sharp she nearly saw white. She stormed inside her apartment, slammed the door shut, grabbed her phone, and dialed the number printed on the card. He picked up after 2 rings, his voice steady, almost expectant. Dr. Carter. So this is your idea of a joke, she snapped, pacing across her living room. You leave a diamond-studded bribe at my door. $1 million, a marriage contract. What exactly are you trying to buy? Mr. Sterling. Her voice cracked with fury. A wife. A beat of silence. Then his calm reply cut through the air like a blade. No. I'm buying time. Her words faltered. Time for what? To avoid a political marriage. I have no intention of entering, he said simply. My family expects me to unite with the Colemans. They've been pressuring me for years. Melissa Coleman wants the marriage more than any merger, and her father wants it even more. But I don't. His tone didn't waver, didn't bend. It carried the cold conviction of a man used to reshaping the world according to his will. I need someone who can stand between me and that alliance long enough for me to dismantle it. Naomi pressed her palm against her forehead. So you choose me. Why me? I barely know you. You're the only woman I've met in a decade who can look me in the eye without flinching, he said. You aren't impressed by my money, my reputation, or my family. You treat me like a man, not an empire. That is rare. A pause. And valuable. Her breath caught, not with flattery, but with bewilderment. That still doesn't justify offering me $1 million for a fake marriage. It isn't fake, he corrected, quiet but firm. It will be legally binding. Your safety will be guaranteed. No one will touch you. His voice softened by a fraction. I wouldn't put you in danger. Those words unsettled her more than anything else, because they sounded sincere, too sincere. And sincerity from a man like Alexander Sterling felt like something no one should trust lightly. "I'm not for sale," she said finally, squeezing her eyes shut. "Find someone else." "Dr. Carter," he began, but she cut the call before he could say another word. She stood in her silent apartment, heart pounding, trying to calm the storm building inside her. Why her? Why now? Why? A contract that felt too much like a trap disguised as opportunity. But she didn't have the luxury to ponder long because a soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. When she opened the door, her mouth fell open. Eleanor Sterling stood there. The elderly woman seemed even more regal under the hallway light, composed, determined, and carrying an envelope in her gloved hand. "Naomi, dear," she said gently. "May I come in?" Confusion overtook Naomi, but she stepped aside. Eleanor entered with the air of someone who had made difficult decisions her entire life, and wasn't afraid to make one more. She lowered herself into a chair, and before Naomi could speak, the older woman reached across the table and took her hand. "I need to tell you something," Eleanor said softly. "Something your father would have wanted you to know." Naomi froze. Her father. The one topic she had kept locked away for years, too painful to revisit, too stained by injustice. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "What do you mean?" Eleanor opened the envelope and slid a stack of aged documents across the table. Newspaper clippings, financial audits, legal notes with seals she recognized from federal courts. Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. "These are case files," Eleanor confirmed, "from when your father was accused of embezzlement. Files that were sealed before the truth could come out." Naomi's heart constricted painfully. Truth. Eleanor's gaze turned heavy. The Colemans orchestrated the charges against him. They manipulated evidence, bribed officials, and used their influence to crush him. "Your father was an honest man, Naomi. He didn't steal a cent." Naomi's breath shook. She felt like the room was tilting. "How do you know this?" "Because the Sterlings and Colemans have been enemies for decades," Eleanor answered. "We know everything they buried, everything they ruined." Her voice grew firm, resolute. "If you want justice, if you want the truth about what happened to your father Alexander, is your way to it." The words hit Naomi like a blow. Every memory of her father, his smile, his exhaustion from fighting a battle he couldn't win, his eventual collapse under pressure, rushed back with brutal clarity. She had spent years telling herself the system failed him. She never imagined the possibility that someone had deliberately destroyed him. Eleanor squeezed her hand, eyes soft but unyielding. "Naomi, my grandson may be cold, but he is not cruel. He will protect you. He will shield you from the Colemans. And in return, you would help him sever the alliance they are forcing on him. You two need each other." Need. The word echoed painfully. Naomi had survived her whole life without needing anyone. Yet the yearning for justice, real justice, burned inside her like a scar too deep to ignore. She swallowed hard. "If I agree, what exactly would this marriage involve?" Eleanor slid another sheet toward her, a list. 3 simple rules written with elegant precision. 1. No shared bedroom. 2. No interference in each other's careers. 3. No emotional involvement. Naomi let out a breathless laugh. "Rule number 3 is ridiculous." Eleanor's eyes twinkled knowingly. "Is it?" Naomi stared at the contract again. 12 months. 12 months to clear her father's name. 12 months of pretending to be the wife of a man who unsettled her more than any patient, any colleague, any human being she'd ever encountered. A man whose touch not even on her skin, just in his voice, His gaze had already shaken something loose inside her. "Why me?" she whispered again, but this time not to Alexander, this time to herself. Eleanor heard her anyway. "Because you're the kind of woman he respects," she said gently, "and the kind he can't easily control." Naomi swallowed a strange ache forming in her chest. "And because I'm not afraid of him." "Exactly." Naomi stared long and hard at the contract. Her father's face flashed before her eyes, tired, hopeful, broken. She had promised herself she would one day clear his name. If this was the path, then maybe fate had made the choice for her long before Alexander Sterling ever walked into her office. With a tremor she tried to hide, she signed the bottom line. Eleanor squeezed her hand once more, relief shining in her eyes. "You've made the right decision, dear." Hours later, as Naomi lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, a realization settled into her bones. Quiet, unsettling, and undeniable. She had entered an agreement built on boundaries. No intimacy, no interference, no love. But she also knew something the contract didn't say. Boundaries were nothing against the kind of gravity Alexander Sterling carried. She believed she could keep her distance, that she could remain untouched, that she could protect her heart. But miles away in a penthouse glowing with city lights, Alexander read the signed document delivered to him by a courier. A slow, satisfied smile curved his lips, the kind that hinted at danger, desire, and certainty. She signed. Daniel reported, unable to hide his shock. Alexander closed the folder with a quiet snap. "Of course she did." "Do you think she'll follow the rules?" Daniel asked hesitantly. Alexander leaned back, eyes gleaming with something dark and unmistakably possessive. "Two of them," he murmured, "but not the third." He lifted her signature to the light, admiring it as though it were a work of art. There was something undeniably thrilling about a woman who walked into his world, not because she wanted wealth or power, but because she wanted truth. "She thinks she can avoid falling," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But I've already made my decision." "And what decision is that?" Daniel asked. Alexander's smile deepened. "I'm not letting her go." Naomi had never felt more out of place in her life, yet she held her head high as the black SUV rolled through the wrought iron gates of Sterling Estate, a sprawling mansion framed by manicured gardens and towering oaks older than the city itself. The house was less of a home and more of a modern palace. Glass walls, sweeping marble steps, staff moving with choreographed elegance. Naomi stepped out, feeling every pair of eyes latch onto her like invisible hooks. The air buzzed with whispers, some subtle, some not, none friendly. Alexander walked beside her, his posture confident, precise, protective, like a man who knew the world belonged to him and had no intention of apologizing for it. Yet Naomi couldn't shake the sharp edge of discomfort slicing through her. She had walked into countless patient rooms with nothing but courage and a clipboard. But this felt different. This was a world built on old money and old bloodlines, where the wrong shade of skin or the wrong background was enough to exile you before you even learned the rules. And she knew exactly how they saw her, a nobody from Harlem, standing next to a man who practically owned the skyline. Alexander sensed her tension. She could tell by the subtle shift of his hand as it brushed her lower back. Not touching, just hovering, a silent offer of grounding. "They'll adjust," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she heard. "You're here because you belong here." Belong. She swallowed hard. The word felt foreign against the reality of crystal chandeliers and oil paintings, whose frames alone likely cost more than her medical school tuition. Inside the main hall, more whispers erupted, staccato bursts of shock, disguised as polite greetings. A few guests recognized her from news articles and hospital features. Most recognized her as someone who did not fit into the carefully curated universe of the elite. Then the temperature of the room seemed to drop. Naomi didn't see the woman at first, only felt the shift in energy, like the air holding its breath. And then she turned, and the world around her narrowed. Melissa Coleman. The heiress strode toward them like a runway model who owned the ground she walked on. Her blonde hair was curled into soft waves. Her red dress clung to her like a second skin, and diamonds glittered at her throat. She looked perfect, crafted, practiced, polished. But her eyes were sharp as a blade held too close. Naomi recognized the name instantly. She had heard it whispered at the hospital, read it in newspapers, felt it linger in every conversation involving the marriage alliance Alexander was supposed to enter. Coleman, the family whose shadow hung over her father's disgrace. She stiffened instinctively, though she kept her face neutral. Melissa's gaze traveled Naomi from head to toe, slow, deliberate, viciously calculating. A smirk curled her lips, the kind that didn't require words to insult, but she spoke anyway, voice sweet as venom. My, Alexander, I didn't realize we were expanding the family to include medical staff. Naomi felt the insult land, but she refused to flinch. She wouldn't give this woman the satisfaction. Melissa leaned in slightly, her smirk widening. Let me guess. A nurse. Naomi remained silent. Melissa's eyes gleamed with cruel curiosity. No. Then what? An assistant? A technician? Or she gasped theatrically. A urology doctor. Touching men all day must make you very comfortable with intimate situations. Her laugh was soft, mocking, poisonous. For a split second, Naomi felt heat rise in her chest, a mixture of humiliation, anger, and something deeper, the sudden awareness that she had stepped into a battlefield she wasn't prepared for. This wasn't about her job. This was about the fact she existed in a space Melissa believed she owned. Before Naomi could respond, not that she planned to, Alexander stepped forward, his expression transforming entirely. The controlled billionaire she had grown accustomed to vanished. In his place stood a man forged from steel and warning. Melissa, he said quietly, you will not speak about her like that. The whisper around the room turned to stunned silence. Melissa blinked, thrown off for the first time. Alex. I was only... Don't. He snapped, not loudly, but with enough force that Melissa's words died in her throat. You crossed a line. She drew herself taller, though her confidence cracked under the weight of his stare. Since when do you defend women like her? She hissed. Naomi felt that sting, but Alexander's voice cut through it. Since she became my wife. The room erupted in gasps. Naomi's breath caught. Alexander didn't waver, didn't soften, didn't even look at her to check her reaction because he didn't have to. He meant every word. Melissa's lips parted in shock. It was as though the world had tilted underneath her, shattering the reality she had lived in. For years she had been told she was destined to be a sterling. For years society had whispered that she and Alexander were inevitable. And now a woman she considered beneath her, a doctor, a stranger, a black woman stood in the place she believed belonged to her. The humiliation twisted Melissa's face, but she hid it quickly, replacing it with a smile that looked painfully tight. I see, she murmured, though her voice trembled faintly. Congratulations, then. She turned as if to walk away, but paused. And when she looked back at Naomi, her eyes were ice. Enjoy it while it lasts. Something in that tone made Naomi's stomach knot, not out of fear, but because she recognized the warning hidden beneath the words. A declaration of war. Later, when the crowd finally dispersed enough for Naomi to breathe, She excused herself to the garden just outside the ballroom. The night air was crisp, scented with roses and cedar. She leaned against the stone railing and exhaled slowly, willing her pulse to settle. She had known the world she stepped into would be hostile. She just hadn't expected the hostility to slash this sharply or this soon. She heard footsteps behind her, but didn't need to turn to know who it was. Alexander's presence had become strangely familiar, steady, heavy, impossible to ignore. "You handled it well," he said quietly, standing beside her, but not too close. Most people crumble their first time facing Melissa. Naomi let out a bitter laugh. "Is this supposed to be a normal day in your world?" He exhaled, gaze drifting toward the glowing windows of the ballroom. "My world has never been quiet. People like Melissa are raised to believe they're entitled to everything. Power, respect, marriage alliances. And they aren't used to losing." Naomi studied him sideways. "She was in love with you." He didn't answer immediately. His jaw tightened slightly. "She wanted what I represented, not me." "And what do you represent?" He met her eyes, then really met them with a seriousness that made her feel like the ground beneath her shifted. "Everything people like her are desperate to possess. Money, influence, legacy. And now..." His eyes softened just a fraction. "A wife they can't control." Naomi forced herself not to look away, though the intensity in his gaze unsettled her, tugged at something deep inside her she wasn't ready to examine. "You didn't have to defend me like that," she said quietly. "It only made things worse." "I know," he admitted, "but I wasn't defending you because of the contract." A pause. "I defended you because she insulted you." Naomi's chest tightened with a strange, unexpected warmth and a flicker of fear. This wasn't part of the rules, and they both knew it. She turned her gaze back to the garden, the moon reflecting off the fountain in ripples of silver. "Melissa isn't going to let this go." She hesitated. "Neither will the Colemans." Alexander's voice turned colder. "Let them try." She looked at him then, not as a billionaire or a contractual partner, but as a man who stood before her with a storm brimming behind his calm exterior. A man who had enemies powerful enough to ruin anyone they touched. A man she was now tied to by paper and circumstance, but also by something else, something more dangerous. "Why does she hate me so much already?" Naomi whispered. Alexander didn't flinch. "Because she never thought anyone could take your place." Naomi's heart stuttered, not because of the words themselves, but because of the truth pulsing beneath them. She wasn't meant to replace Melissa. She wasn't meant to be here at all. Yet she was. And the world around them had already begun to reject her presence with the same force it had once rejected her father. The realization sank heavy into her. This marriage was not simply a strategic shield for Alexander. It was a spark in a room full of gasoline. Inside the mansion, as music resumed and conversations continued, Melissa stood by a window watching them. Her nails dug into her champagne glass so hard it nearly cracked. Anger pulsed in her veins with a clarity she had never known. A slow, poisonous vow curled inside her. She had lost battles before, but she had never lost Alexander. Not truly. Not until now. And she would not accept that outcome. Not when the woman beside him was someone she considered disposable. Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried a chilling promise. "If she thinks she can take him." Her fingers tightened. She has no idea who she's fighting. And in the garden below, unaware of the exact depth of the storm forming, Naomi felt a distant unease settle into her bones. A quiet instinct telling her that whatever she had signed up for, the real war, had only just begun. Life in Sterling Estate settled into a rhythm Naomi never saw coming. A rhythm that disturbed her, precisely because of how natural it began to feel. At first, she treated the mansion like a temporary hotel, beautiful, untouchable, not hers. She stayed in her guest bedroom, kept to her routines, and tiptoed around the silence that always followed Alexander like a second shadow. But silence eventually reveals more than words. And living with a man like Alexander Sterling meant learning that beneath the cold exterior was a mind always observing, absorbing, cataloging everything she did and everything that affected her. The first shift happened in the smallest, most ridiculous way. Naomi was examining a patient at the hospital, a Wall Street broker with more ego than actual problems, when she sensed something strange. A tension, a weight. She glanced toward the door and froze. Alexander stood there, not intruding, not speaking, just standing, watching. His jaw tight, his posture too rigid, his eyes fixed on the scene with a barely concealed irritation, like every second another man had. Naomi's attention was an offense to him personally. She finished the exam, wrapped it up quickly, and caught up to him in the hallway. "Did you need something?" she asked, slightly breathless. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tightness to it she hadn't seen before. "I thought you were done for the day," he said. It wasn't an answer. It was an accusation wrapped in concern. "This is my job," she replied. "It involves patients. Men. Sick men." "I can see that," he muttered. His eyes flicked back toward the room, then returned to her, darker now. "He was looking at you." Naomi blinked. Alexander. He was terrified I'd diagnose him with something catastrophic. "He was flirting?" Alexander countered, voice dropping. "And you didn't notice?" Naomi opened her mouth to argue, but then she saw it, a flicker of something raw behind his annoyance. Jealousy. It should have irritated her. It should have felt like a complication she didn't need. Yet against her will, something warm fluttered in her chest. "You're jealous?" she almost teased, but the thought alone startled her. Their days continued like that, small moments building into something she couldn't deny. She found herself noticing things she had no business noticing, how Alexander furrowed his brows when he read reports too late into the night, how he drank his coffee black, but made hers with a little too much milk, because he'd once overheard her complaining. Hospital coffee was sour. How he paused whenever she walked into a room, as though she disrupted his entire equilibrium without trying. One morning she woke to find a steaming mug of cappuccino on the counter, with her name printed above it in pen. She laughed, surprise touched. It wasn't the coffee that mattered. It was the fact that a man like him remembered something so small. When she thanked him later, he only shrugged. "You look tired. I thought it would help." But she saw the way his eyes warmed when she smiled. Another night she found him asleep in his office, still in his suit, papers scattered around him like the remnants of a defeated battlefield. He looked nothing like the cold CEO the world saw. In that moment, he looked human, vulnerable, exhausted. Without thinking, she draped a blanket over him, her fingers brushing his hair. He stirred slightly, murmured something she couldn't decipher, but didn't wake. And Naomi stood there longer than she had any reason to, her heart tightening at the sight. They gravitated toward each other without meaning to. Conversations lengthened. Silences grew comfortable. She learned he preferred thunderstorms over calm nights because they reminded him he wasn't the only force capable of breaking the world open. He learned, she hummed quietly to herself when she was concentrating, that she hid stress beneath sarcasm, that she loved her job more than anything, but hated how people underestimated her. And somewhere between late-night coffees, quiet dinners, and half-accidental confessions, Naomi realized something terrifying. She had stopped reminding herself that this was temporary. The turning point came on a night far colder than it should have been. Naomi had stepped onto the balcony to clear her head, wrapping her arms around herself as she gazed out at the glowing Manhattan skyline. The wind tugged at her hair, the city humming below, like a living heartbeat. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt him the moment he stepped beside her. The shift in air, the subtle warmth that followed him everywhere. They stood in silence for a moment, and she tried to ignore the way her pulse picked up. "You shouldn't be out here without a jacket," Alexander murmured. "I'm fine. That's not the point." She turned to him, brow raised. "What is the point?" His lips curved in a way that made her chest tighten. "That I'm not in the mood to watch you freeze." A laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "You're acting like you care." "I do." He said it simply as though it were the most obvious truth in the world. Her breath caught. She swallowed. "Why?" He looked at her, then really looked at her, the way one looks at a truth they've been carefully avoiding. "Because," he said slowly, as though choosing each word mattered for the first time in my life, "I want someone to stay. Not because of my name, not because of my money." His voice softened. "But because she wants me." Her heartbeat stumbled. No one had ever said something like that to her, certainly not a man with a universe at his feet, and hearing it felt like being pulled toward a precipice she had been pretending didn't exist. "Alexander," she whispered, unsure what she was trying to say. But she never got the chance to finish, because fate, the cruel, calculated kind, chose that moment to strike. Her phone buzzed. A notification, then another, and another. Dozens, hundreds. Her screen lit up like a siren, vibrations rattling against her palm. She unlocked it, and the ground under her dropped. Headlines, blogs, gossip sites exploding with one story. Sterling's new wife is infertile. Anonymous medical report proves Naomi Carter cannot bear children. Sterling family devastated over lack of heir. Her stomach turned to ice. "No," she whispered. "No, this is fake. These aren't real." Alexander snatched the phone from her hand, brows tightening as he scanned the articles. His jaw hardened into something dangerously sharp. "Coleman's," he growled. "They did this." Before she could respond, shouting erupted from inside. Eleanor Sterling's voice echoed harshly. "Is it true?" someone demanded. "How could this happen? We needed an heir. Alexander, what have you done?" They stormed into the main hall, where dozens of Sterling relatives and board members had gathered, their faces twisted in outrage and panic. Naomi felt dozens of accusing eyes converge on her cold hands, squeezing around her throat. She tried to speak, but her voice drowned in the storm of accusations. Melissa was there too, standing near the fireplace, arms crossed, feigning concern, while triumph glittered in her eyes. Eleanor stepped forward, her expression severe. "Naomi, tell us the truth." Naomi swallowed hard. "The report is fake. I've never had fertility issues. Someone fabricated—" "That's enough," Melissa interrupted, her tone dripping with condescension. "We don't need excuses. We need facts. And the fact is, Alexander chose a wife who cannot continue the Sterling line. The responsible thing," she glanced at Alexander, "would be to end this now before the damage gets worse." Naomi's breath hitched. She felt exposed, cornered, humiliated in ways she never imagined. She had dealt with arrogance, discrimination, insults, but nothing like this. Nothing this cruel, this calculated. And then she heard a sound she would never forget. Alexander slamming his hand against the dining table. "Enough." The entire room fell silent. His voice was low, lethal, shaking with contained fury. "Naomi is not infertile. The report is fabricated. And even if it weren't," his gaze swept the room sharp enough to cut through bone, "I did not marry her for the ability to produce an heir." Melissa stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Then why did you marry her?" His answer came without hesitation. Because I chose her. Then he turned to face everyone, his expression fierce, raw, honest. And let me make this perfectly clear. I married Naomi. Not a womb. Not a legacy. Her. Naomi stood frozen breath, trembling. She had seen Alexander angry. She had seen him annoyed, calculating, amused. But she had never seen him fight for her. For the first time, he looked imperfect, flawed, human, hurt. And it was this version of him, unshielded, unguarded, that shattered something inside her. Her heart didn't fall. It didn't even drop. It cracked open, wide, helpless. And in that crack, love poured in. The kind that terrified her precisely because she had never meant to feel it. The kind she feared would destroy her if she wasn't careful. But as she met Alexander's gaze from across the room, gaze fierce with loyalty, with fury, with something dangerously close to longing, she realized being careful was no longer an option. Not when her heart had already chosen him. The scandal faded from headlines within days, thanks to Alexander's fury, sterling lawyers, and the fact that Naomi refused to collapse under pressure. But inside her, something had changed permanently. Every whisper of doubt, every reminder of her contract, every moment she told herself she could keep her heart locked away, had fallen apart the night Alexander defended her. He had stood between her and the world, with nothing but his voice and his conviction, and the memory of it replayed in her chest like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. But there was no time to dwell on those feelings. Because the next morning, the project she had been quietly pursuing for years, the truth of her father's wrongful conviction finally cracked open. It began with a simple envelope slipped under her door. No return address. No handwriting she recognized. Inside was a single USB drive, and on it a list of accounting files dating back 20 years with a name she hadn't heard since she was 7 years old. Harold Bennett, the accountant who vanished the same year her father was arrested. The man the police dismissed as irrelevant. The man whose absence destroyed any chance her father had to prove his innocence. For a long moment, Naomi stood frozen in her room, the USB trembling in her hands. It felt like opening a coffin that had never been allowed to rest. Alexander found her like that. He didn't say anything at first. He just stepped in quietly, as if sensing the air was charged with something fragile. His gray eyes softened as he saw the trembling in her shoulders. "Naomi," he said gently, "tell me." So she did. For the first time, she told him everything. Her father's arrest, the night men in suits dragged him away, the way her mother had collapsed into sobs. How Naomi spent years bouncing between foster homes after her mother died of heartbreak. How she clawed her way into the medical world with a fury that never fully subsided. Every memory she had locked in a box came tumbling out, and Alexander didn't interrupt once. He didn't offer empty comfort. He simply listened, his gaze rooted in hers, as if absorbing every piece of her pain was the only task he had ever been given. When she finished, he took the USB from her hands and closed his fingers around it. "We find him," he said, voice steady and absolute. "Bennett, Coleman, anyone who touched this." His eyes darkened. "We don't stop until the truth is in your hands." Naomi didn't know how to respond. Gratitude felt too small. Love felt too dangerous. So she settled for the only thing she could manage. "Thank you," she whispered. The next 2 weeks were a blur of encrypted emails, late-night calls, and clandestine addresses. Sterling Tech's cybersecurity division, under Alexander's private orders, pulled strings Naomi didn't know existed. Old corporate records were unearthed, bank transfers, traced defunct companies, tracked down to dust-covered storage lockers. Finally, one name resurfaced. Harold Bennett, living under an alias in an old industrial district outside Manhattan. The address led them to a long-abandoned warehouse complex, a maze of rusted shipping containers and shattered windows. It smelled of mold and forgotten things. Naomi's heart pounded the moment they stepped inside. The cold air bit through her jacket, and every echo made her nerves spike. Alexander stayed close enough that she felt his presence like a shield. They found Bennett in the deepest corner of the warehouse, huddled behind an overturned metal desk. He looked older than his age, his beard unkempt hair, gray eyes hollow with decades of fear. He clutched a folder to his chest, as though it were the only thing keeping him alive. Naomi's breath hitched when their eyes met. "Mr. Bennett." Her voice barely carried. The man recoiled at first, but when he saw her face, saw the familiar features of the lawyer who once defended her father, his expression crumpled. "You," he whispered. "You look like him. You have his eyes." Naomi stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I need the truth, please, about my father." Bennett squeezed the folder tighter, his hands shaking violently. "They forced me," he croaked. "They threatened my family, told me if I didn't sign the doctored reports they would destroy everything." Tears streaked down his dirt-stained face. "Your father found out. He confronted Coleman's people. They framed him before he could expose them. I wanted to testify. I swear I did. But the night before the hearing, men came to my house. I fled. I've been running ever since." Naomi felt the world sway under her feet. She had prepared herself for this moment for years, for answers, for closure. But nothing prepared her for the weight of hearing the truth spoken aloud. Her father had been innocent, a good man ruined because powerful men needed a scapegoat. She opened her mouth to speak, to ask more, but Alexander suddenly stiffened beside her, the instinctive tension of someone sensing danger before it appeared. A faint rumble echoed outside. Tires on gravel. Too fast. "Naomi," he said sharply, "get behind me." Before she could react, the warehouse doors exploded open, headlights slicing through the darkness. A black SUV barreled straight toward them, engine roaring like a beast unleashed. "Move!" Alexander grabbed her, yanking her out of the vehicle's path, just as rounds of gunfire shattered the metal walls. Bennett screamed and ducked. Naomi stumbled, her heart slamming into her ribs. The shots came rapid and vicious, ricocheting off beams. She couldn't see the shooter, couldn't even breathe. Then she felt it, a force slamming into her. No, into him. Alexander jerked backward, his body colliding with hers as he shielded her from the bullets. Naomi's scream ripped from her throat as he collapsed against her, the full weight of him dragging her to the ground. She felt the wet heat spreading across her hands before she even looked. Blood. His blood. "No," she choked. "No, no, no, Alexander." She pressed her hands over the wound, the world tilting, her vision blurring with panic. "Stay with me. Please, just stay with me." He tried to speak, but only coughed, crimson staining his lips. "Naomi." His voice was barely there, weak, fading. "You're safe. That's what matters." "Shut up. Don't say it like that," she sobbed, her hands trembling uncontrollably. "You're not leaving me. Do you hear me? You don't get to do that." He managed a faint smile, pained, but somehow still tender. "If you go." His eyelids fluttered, his breathing shallow. "Don't go alone." Her heart cracked wide open, the terror swallowing everything logical inside her. She shook him, desperate, sobbing, as if she could force life back into him through sheer will. But Alexander's eyes slipped shut, his body going limp against her, just as Sterling security stormed the warehouse and pulled them apart. She screamed his name the entire drive to the hospital. Hours later, Naomi sat beside his hospital bed, the antiseptic air suffocating her. Machines beeped steadily, but every sound felt like an accusation, like she had led him into danger, like she had been the reason he took a bullet meant for her. The guilt pressed down until she couldn't breathe. When Alexander finally stirred his fingers, twitching, Naomi shot upright. His eyes cracked open, unfocused at first, then slowly finding her. And when he saw her, the fear, the exhaustion, the heartbreak etched into her face. He lifted his hand with visible effort, palm open. She broke. Naomi grabbed his hand and pressed it to her cheek, tears spilling as she leaned into the warmth of his skin. "You idiot," she whispered, trembling. "Why would you do something so reckless?" He tried to smile, but the weakness in it only made her cry harder. Because he murmured, voice rough, "You're the only thing I've ever been willing to risk everything for." Her chest tightened. She kissed his knuckles, soft, desperate, grateful he was still alive. He closed his eyes, exhausted, but his fingers curled around hers, as if anchoring himself to the world. In that dim hospital room, Naomi realized something she had tried so hard to avoid. She wasn't afraid of loving him anymore. She was terrified of losing him. And now more than ever, she would tear down the entire Coleman empire, if that was what it took to finish what her father began, and to keep Alexander alive. Naomi should have known peace wouldn't last, not when every step closer to the truth tore deeper into the Coleman empire, not when Melissa's eyes had burned with a kind of hunger that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with possession. After the shooting that nearly took Alexander's life, security doubled, cameras were installed, and sterling guards shadowed Naomi everywhere she went. But hatred like Melissa's didn't die. It evolved, twisted, leaked through cracks until it found a new shape. And Naomi felt it long before it arrived. It started with silence. Her phone buzzing on the counter, a message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it until she saw the image attached. Her assistant Mia, bound and terrified, gagged with duct tape tears streaking down her cheeks. Naomi's entire body went cold. Beneath the photo was a message. "If you want her to live, come alone. Sterling follows you, both die." Then another message seconds later. "Warehouse 17. The ruins your father once owned." Her stomach twisted violently. The breath left her lungs in a sharp shudder. It was the same building where she and Alexander had nearly been killed. A place soaked with ghosts and ashes. Melissa wanted a stage drenched in Naomi's past, a location chosen like a mockery. "Here is the legacy you're fighting for. Let me burn it down with you inside it." Naomi didn't think, didn't pack, didn't warn anyone. She simply grabbed her coat and keys, praying her footsteps wouldn't wake Alexander resting in the other room. Even injured, he'd sense something was wrong. He always did. But Melissa's message echoed through her skull, "Come alone." If she put him in danger again, if she let another bullet tear into him, she wouldn't survive it. She made it out the back exit, through the garden, past the gate before the guards noticed. She drove fast, too fast, the city blurring outside her window as panic clawed at her throat. Her hands shook on the wheel. Every passing second felt like a countdown she couldn't stop. She told herself she could do this alone, that she wouldn't let another innocent person get hurt because of her. But halfway there, she glanced in her rearview mirror. A familiar black car was tailing her. Her pulse spiked. She knew that car. Alexander's. Her grip tightened. "No," she whispered. "No, no, don't come." She pushed the gas harder, but the car pulled closer, relentless. Alexander must have woken, must have realized she was gone, must have felt something was wrong because he always felt her fear like it was his own. She reached Warehouse 17 moments later. The building loomed like a corpse against the night sky, half-collapsed walls blackened with the memory of fire, Naomi jumped out of the car, heart pounding so hard it hurt. She barely took 2 steps when her phone rang. Melissa's voice slithered out, sharp, triumphant. "I knew you'd come running." Naomi scanned the shadows, every nerve alert. "Where is Mia?" "Inside," Melissa replied sweetly. "The poor thing cried for hours. I told her you'd either save her or die with her. Either way, a win." Naomi's jaw clenched. "Let her go. This is between you and me." "Everything is between us," Melissa hissed. "You took what should have been mine. You think Alexander truly loves you? He's infatuated, confused. Men always return to their equals." Her voice hardened. "And his equal is me." Before Naomi could answer, she heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. She spun. Alexander's car skidded to a stop. He stepped out, breathless, face pale from the unhealed wound, but fury blazing through him. "Naomi!" he shouted, striding toward her. "What the hell are you doing here? You shouldn't be alone." A deafening beep cut through the air, a sound Naomi had only heard once before. A detonator. Melissa's voice sharpened into a scream. "You brought him. You think I'm bluffing?" Naomi didn't think. She ran toward Alexander, shouting, "Go back!" She wired the whole place. But he didn't retreat. He sprinted toward her instead, closing the distance in seconds, grabbing her arms with a trembling grip. "I'm not leaving you again," he rasped. "I'm not letting you walk into this alone." Naomi opened her mouth. She meant to push him, to scream at him, to run, but in the next instant, everything collapsed into a single horrifying second. A metallic click, a hiss, Melissa's unhinged shriek echoing through the warehouse. "If I can't have him, no one can." And then, detonation. A roar like the world splitting open surged through the night. Flames burst outward, the warehouse exploding into a cyclone of fire, steel, and concrete. Naomi barely saw it happen, only felt Alexander's arms lock around her, his body twisting, shielding her as the shock waves slammed into them. They hit the ground, hard dust and heat swallowing them whole. Her ears rang, vision-spinning lungs crushed by the weight of debris, falling around them in a deadly cascade. Alexander covered her, pressing her head to his chest, as metal beams and bricks crashed down where she would have stood. His voice rasped against her ear, raw with determination. "I promised you." He coughed, breath shuddering. "I'd always shield you." The building groaned, a monstrous dying sound, as the remaining structure buckled. Sparks flew overhead. A beam crashed inches away, sending a wave of heat across their skin. Naomi clung to him, fingers digging into his arms as tears blurred her vision. "Alexander, please, I've got you," he whispered. "I'm not letting go." The final collapse came in a violent shatter of stone and steel. Darkness swallowed everything. It felt like hours later, maybe minutes, maybe seconds, when Naomi became aware of faint voices. Boots on gravel. A distant shout. "We found 2. They're under the west wing." Then hands. Lights. The metallic whine of rescue tools cutting through debris. Naomi gasped as fresh air hit her lungs, dust lifting away like fog. When the rubble above them was finally cleared, firefighters froze. Alexander lay on his back, bruised, battered, barely conscious. Naomi sprawled across his chest, his arms locked around her even in unconsciousness, as if death itself would have had to pry her from him. Their hands were still clasped together, knuckles white, fingers woven so tightly, the rescuers had to work carefully not to break them apart. The scene was silent for a moment, a raw, haunting picture of devotion carved into wreckage. A rescuer muttered under his breath, shaken. They held on, all the way through. Naomi stirred first, coughing violently as she was lifted onto a stretcher. She fought their hands weakly, voice hoarse. "Alexander, where is he? Let me see him." They reassured her. He was right beside her, but she didn't relax until she saw him being carried out, limp but breathing. Hours later in the hospital, Naomi sat by his bed again, just like before. But this time something fundamental inside her had broken and been remade. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, studied the bruises along his jaw, the cuts on his hands from clawing through debris while holding her. Every injury felt like a wound on her own skin. Mia survived. Melissa vanished. The police believed she fled the country. And yet all Naomi could focus on was the man lying unconscious in the bed in front of her, the man who had thrown himself over her without hesitation, who had walked into fire because she was there, who had chosen her again and again, even when she tried to push him away. When he finally opened his eyes, just a fraction, just enough to find her, Naomi broke, not with panic this time, but with something deeper, trembling, fierce. She leaned close, took his hand, and whispered in a voice thick with emotion she could no longer hide. "You don't get to do that again. If you run into fire, I run with you. If you face death, I face it too. I'm not going anywhere. Not without you." His lips curved faintly, the ghost of his familiar stubbornness. "Good," he murmured weakly, "because I'm not done loving you yet." And Naomi knew this time neither of them would survive pretending it was just a contract. The explosion should have been the end of everything. Naomi's fight, her father's name, and whatever fragile miracle was growing between her and Alexander. But instead, it became the match that lit the downfall of an empire. In the days following the bombing, the world shifted with a ferocity neither of them had expected. Evidence gathered from Harold Bennett, combined with Sterling Tech's security footage and the recordings Alexander's team recovered from Melissa's burner phones, ignited a storm that swept across federal offices like wildfire. The FBI launched full-scale raids on Coleman Global. Financial crimes units reopened bank accounts frozen for years. Prosecutors who once bowed to pressure suddenly found themselves backed by mountains of undeniable proof. And for the first time since her father's arrest, Naomi saw justice not as a distant dream, but as a living thing rising from ashes. She sat beside Alexander as he recovered in the penthouse, bandaged, bruised, but alive, and watched legal documents pile up on the coffee table. Every update from their lawyers, every classified report, every subpoena issued against the Colemans was like a breath she had been waiting 20 years to take. Alexander wasn't supposed to be working, but he refused to rest when her future was being rewritten. "You should be sleeping," she murmured, once placing a hand on his arm. He glanced up over the documents, giving her that stubborn, quiet smile she had come to recognize. "You fought alone too long. Let me carry some of it." She didn't trust herself to answer, but her hand stayed on his longer than she meant it to. 2 weeks passed. Melissa was found at a private airstrip in New Jersey, attempting to flee the country. She didn't go quietly. She never did. But the moment federal agents opened her luggage to reveal detonator blueprints and a list of Sterling schedules, it was over. Murder attempt, kidnapping, evidence tampering, terroristic threats. The list grew by the minute. Each charge, another nail in the coffin she had built with her own hands. When news broke of her arrest, Naomi didn't feel triumph. She felt only a deep, hollow ache, the kind that comes from witnessing the full ruin of someone who could have chosen light, but chased darkness instead. But Melissa was only one head of a decaying beast. Her father and uncles were indicted days later for racketeering, bribery, falsifying documents, money laundering, and perjury in multiple federal cases, including Naomi's father's trial. Their empire, once towering, untouchable, collapsed like a rotten structure the moment truth was scraped across its surface. Naomi watched it all with a quiet, trembling disbelief. her hands intertwined with Alexander's, as if grounding herself through the storm. And finally, after nearly a month of hearings, statements, motions, and battles that seemed to stretch into eternity, the moment came. The reopening of her father's case. She had imagined that courtroom her entire adult life. The cold walls, the stern judge, the spectators who would never understand the weight of the grief she carried. But nothing prepared her for the reality of walking through those doors with Alexander by her side, his presence a silent promise, in a place where she had once stood small and alone. They sat together at the front, Naomi's hands trembling slightly, despite everything she tried to hide. Alexander noticed. Without looking at her, he slid his hand beneath the table and intertwined his fingers with hers. She froze, breath catching, but didn't pull away. The judge entered. Proceedings began. Lawyers presented evidence she had hunted for years. Bennett testified through tears, offering every detail he had buried in fear. Federal investigators explained the forged documents, the threats, the bribes, the orchestrated media smear campaigns designed to destroy a single innocent man. Each fact landed like a blow, reopening wounds Naomi thought she had learned to live with. Her chest tightened with every word, anger, sorrow, relief colliding inside her in painful waves. When the judge asked if anyone wished to speak on behalf of the Carter family, Naomi rose before she even realized she was standing. Her knees shook slightly, but her voice did not. "My father," she said, eyes fixed on the judge, was a good man, a moral man, a man who believed in honesty, even when it cost him everything. He was destroyed to protect the greed of others. And though I cannot bring him back, I am here to reclaim what was taken from him, his truth. The courtroom held its breath. For a moment, Naomi's eyes drifted sideways. Alexander was watching her with something raw, fierce, unguarded. Something that made her knees threaten to buckle. Hours passed. Evidence piled higher. And when the judge finally raised the final document, the air in the room thickened until Naomi could barely breathe. In the matter of Joseph Carter, her hands clenched around the table edge. Based on newly presented evidence, it is the ruling of this court that Joseph Carter is hereby declared innocent of all charges. Naomi's breath shattered. The words hit her like a tidal wave she had run toward for 20 years. The judge continued, voice steady. He was unjustly accused. The case is overturned. His name is cleared. Naomi didn't hear anything after that. She didn't realize she was crying until a warm hand cupped the back of her neck and pulled her gently into a steady, grounding embrace. Alexander's voice brushed her ear, soft, low, trembling just slightly. "Naomi, it's over. You did it." She shook her head, trying to speak through the sob that broke loose. "No, I didn't." He tightened his grip, turning her toward him, eyes burning with conviction. "You fought for this," he whispered. "You endured everything they threw at you. You carried this pain alone for 20 years. And now look." He brushed away a tear with his thumb, his forehead nearly touching hers. "This is your victory, your justice." His words hit her harder than the verdict, because they came not from a partner in a contract, not from a man fulfilling an obligation, but from someone who had bled for her, protected her, believed in her with a devotion she had never known before. She didn't know who moved first. She only knew that suddenly, Alexander's hands were on her shoulders, steadying her, as if her grief had knocked the strength from her body. She leaned into him helplessly, instinctively, her forehead pressing against the hollow of his throat as years of buried anguish tore free from her chest. He held her there, arms circling her tightly, one hand cradling her head, as though shielding her from a world that had already taken too much. His breath trembled against her hair, and for the first time, She realized this victory was his too, not just out of loyalty, but because her pain affected him as deeply as his own. When she finally pulled back, tears still streaming down her cheeks, he stayed close enough that their breaths mingled, close enough that she could see every unspoken emotion swimming in his eyes. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between them was full of words neither of them had dared to voice until now. But before either of them could cross the fragile line between revelation and confession, photographers swarmed the hallway outside. Lawyers rushed forward with hands to shake. Reporters shouted questions through cracked doors. The moment shattered like glass struck by chaos. Naomi wiped her tears, straightened her spine, and stepped forward with the poise of someone who had spent her whole life learning how to survive earthquakes. Alexander followed her, a silent sentinel at her side, every inch of him radiating pride and protectiveness. Yet beneath the victory, beneath the relief, beneath the storm of emotions she could barely contain, Naomi felt something heavier settling inside her. Justice was won. But now the contract between them, the fragile lie they had hidden behind, felt wrong in her hands. Because she no longer feared loving him. She feared what would happen if he didn't love her back. The weeks following the verdict unfolded like a dream Naomi had never dared to imagine. The world no longer weighed on her shoulders. Her father's name was cleared. The Coleman empire lay in ruins, and Melissa's trial was set to begin. But for once, Naomi didn't feel fear tugging at her from the shadows. What she felt instead was possibility, dangerous, intoxicating possibility, because the foundation she'd built with Alexander out of necessity had shifted into something deeper, heavier, and undeniably real. Still, neither of them spoke about the contract in the days after the court ruling. It hung between them like a fragile memory, a piece of paper that felt embarrassingly small compared to everything they had survived. Naomi waited for him to bring it up. Alexander waited for her. And in that silent waiting, something grew slowly, steadily, like a rose opening under impossible winter light. So when he asked her to take a drive with him, one crisp December morning, she didn't question it, even as his posture was too tense, his silence too loaded, his eyes flicking toward her more times than usual. He drove without explaining, navigating past Manhattan, past the Hudson, and into countryside roads she didn't recognize. The world grew quieter as they went, frost glittering over rolling hills, until he finally turned onto a long stone path lined with lanterns. At the end of the path stood an estate she'd never seen before, a breathtaking expanse of glass architecture blended with wild, sprawling gardens full of winter roses, blooming impossibly against the cold. She gasped without meaning to. "Alexander, what is this place?" He parked, stepped out, and opened her door with a nervousness she'd only ever seen once when he was bleeding out in her arms. "It's yours," he said simply, watching her reaction, as if it were the verdict of a lifetime. She spun toward him, heart stumbling. "What do you mean mine?" "The Sterling Rose estate," he said, voice softening. "It was abandoned for decades. I bought it right after the case was reopened. I restored it the way it should have been. Beautiful, resilient, built to last. Just like you." He exhaled slowly. "I wanted you to have a home untouched by the past. A place that's only yours." Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to tell him she didn't need a garden or an estate. Only him. But something about the look in his eyes stopped her. As if he was leading to something far bigger. He led her into the center of the garden, where thousands of roses bloomed despite the frost, white and red, stretching in perfect symmetry. Music drifted through the air, soft and romantic, and only then did she notice chairs, decorations, a silk aisle, dozens of people in elegant attire turning toward her with warm smiles. Naomi froze. Alexander. What is... She couldn't finish, because in the next breath he dropped to one knee. The crowd gasped softly. Naomi couldn't breathe. He looked up at her with a tenderness that melted every fear she'd ever held. "There's no contract this time," he said quietly, his voice carrying through the entire garden. "No deadline. No alliance. No reason except the truth." She covered her mouth, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he'd hear it. He continued, eyes never leaving hers. "Naomi Carter, you walked into my life as a stranger, challenged me without fear, protected me without hesitation, and loved me before either of us admitted it." His voice thickened, almost breaking. "You were the first person who ever saw me. Not the name, not the money, not the legacy, just me. And I want to spend every day of the rest of my life becoming a man worthy of that." He took a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it, revealing a ring that caught the winter light like a star. "So I'm asking you, without obligation, without pressure, with nothing but love, will you be my wife?" The world blurred. Naomi felt tears slide down her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. Because she knew this wasn't the man who entered her hospital room months ago, cold and unreadable. This was the man who had bled for her, fought for her, held her through nightmares, believed in her when she couldn't breathe, and loved her so deeply it changed the shape of her life. Her voice trembled. "Yes," she whispered, then laughed through tears. "Yes, Alexander. 1,000 times yes." He rose in one fluid motion, pulled her into his arms, and kissed her slow, deep, unguarded. The garden erupted in applause, but Naomi barely heard it. All she felt was him, his warmth wrapping around her, as if she were the only person in existence. Hours later, as the ceremony began under a canopy of roses and winter sky, Naomi walked down the aisle, with snow beginning to fall, soft, delicate flakes drifting through the air like blessings. She looked at Alexander waiting for her at the altar, tall, elegant eyes shimmering with emotion, and her heart swelled until it ached. The vows they exchanged were simple and raw, not polished or poetic, but painfully real. Alexander's hands trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. "You're my beginning and my choice," he murmured, "and I'll choose you again in every lifetime." Naomi's breath caught. She touched his cheek gently, letting herself love him openly. "I say yes," she whispered. "Not for the estate, not for the name, not for the world watching." Her voice softened. "I say yes, for you." When they kissed, the snowfall grew thicker, as if the sky itself blessed their union. Alexander wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close until she felt the steady beat of his heart against hers. He lowered his forehead to hers, breath warm in the cold air. "Welcome," he whispered, voice reverent to my world. Naomi smiled through tears. "No." She breathed, her fingers gently touching his jaw. "Now it's our world." The reception lasted deep into the night, filled with laughter, dancing, and toasts from people who had once doubted her, but now looked at her with awe. Yet Naomi only wanted to be near Alexander, every touch, every glance, reminding her how far they'd come from the cold office where they first met. 1 year later, the Sterling Rose estate echoed with a new kind of music, soft cries, laughter, gentle chaos. Naomi held 2 tiny newborns in her arms, their small fingers curled around her thumbs. Alexander leaned over her shoulder, his large hands trembling as he touched the twins' heads, awe painting his features in a way she had never seen. "A girl and a boy," Naomi whispered, her voice breaking with happiness. "They're perfect. They're ours," Alexander murmured, kissing Naomi's temple with a tenderness that melted her. the best thing we ever created. Naomi looked down at the babies, at the man she loved, at the home they built from ashes and courage, and her chest filled with a warmth she couldn't contain. She had fought for justice. She had fought for truth. But love, this love had been the unexpected victory she cherished most. And as snow fell again outside the window, just like the day they married, Naomi knew one simple truth. Every battle, every tear, every risk had led her here to Alexander, to their children, to a life she once thought impossible, to forever.